If you ever wanted to get a wholesale deal on Amazon and figure out how to get your first one or get started with wholesale, I have a real treat for you today. I have Corey Ganim. He's done $12 million on wholesale selling on Amazon. He goes over all his scripts, how to close accounts, how to find accounts, how to build relationships with suppliers, how he got started, how to not have to do ACH transfer, the tool he uses for that. Just a whole plethora of great information. I will give you a fair warning. I was a little nasally. Allergies have been terrible. But other than that, the content in this is awesome. Definitely go give him a follow and let me know what you think in the comments as well. What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Side Hustle Experiment podcast. Today, I have my friend Corey Ganim on the show. He's sold over $12 million on Amazon. His primary business model is wholesale. So today, we're going to be going all over wholesale. If you're interested in that, how you can get started, and kind of his whole journey. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it. Love any opportunity to talk wholesale. I'm all for it.
Cool deal. You want to give the people a little background, kind of how you got started, and kind of take us all the way back to the beginning, and maybe kind of like why you decided to sell on Amazon.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, if we're talking about why I decided to start selling on Amazon, then we would have to go back to really right around like January of 2017. So, January of 2017, I'm a senior in college. I'm planning to graduate that May. So, I've got like, 4 or 5 months until graduation at that point. And I had a full-time job offer, but it wasn't going to start until 2 months after graduation. So basically I had like a 2 month gap to fill.
Mhm.
Right. And I'm not the kind of person that can like sit around and do nothing, at least not for, many, many days in a row. So I go on YouTube and I'm like, all right, how can I make money? What are some things I can do in the meantime to kind of drum up some income? And so I stumbled.
Just wanted to take a quick break to let you know I launched a school community called Advanced Arbitrage Tactics. I'd love to have you in there. We have a online arbitrage crash course, has about 15 videos, how you get started, a community of awesome people. We literally just did a back to school call, how to crush back to school, showed you exactly how to find back to school products using Keepa, all this other stuff. There's a bunch of other guides in there. Community, we do bi-weekly calls, Q&A, all that stuff. If you are interested, there will be a link below, and I hope to see you inside the school.
Upon a Reezy Resells video, which if you guys listening to this, if you're not familiar with him, he's an OG. He's been on YouTube for, probably close to a decade at this point. But the video goes into, or I think the video is just him going into like a Marshall's or even like a Goodwill and, just scanning books at the Goodwill or scanning products at the Marshall's and comparing the pricing to what he was seeing on the shelves to the pricing on Amazon. And it was mind boggling to me at the time because I was like, wait, you can sell on Amazon? Like I thought everything I bought on Amazon, I thought I was buying from Jeff Bezos. So come to, do a lot more research on the model. 3 to 4 months go by, I graduate. And right after graduation, I start going to thrift stores in my town looking for used books. That was kind of the model that I got into from the start. So I'm buying these books for 50 cents, $1, $2. I'm selling them on Amazon for 15, 20, $30. Sometimes, 50 or $100, some of these textbooks can go for. So really high margins. Then I end up moving across the country to pursue that job that I mentioned, but I didn't have a car in the city that I moved to. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to continue selling on Amazon, I've got to find another business model because I don't have a way to go around and source these books. So that's when I started getting into online arbitrage. I found Chris Grant. I connected with Chris Grant. I was getting into tactical arbitrage, that tool, and using that to source online arbitrage leads. Did that for about a year and a half. And then the beginning of 2019 is when I started getting into wholesale. And my business has been pretty much 100% wholesale ever since January 2019. So about 5.5 years of wholesale, but 7 years of selling on Amazon.
Wow, that's awesome. We have like a really similar start because I started a Reezy Resell video too about selling books. I started flipping furniture before I got into books. And it was kind of the same, I guess, realization. It's like, well, I can only get like one piece of furniture in the car at a time. This isn't super efficient. Like to store furniture, that's like, I had like a 1-bedroom apartment. Like that didn't really work. And I was like, and then I went home to New York and everyone's like, oh, can I buy this table? And I was like, oh yeah, I'll be back in a week. And they're like, no, we want it now. I was like,
Right.
damn. And then I lost like $1,000, $2,000. I'm like, yeah, I can't have to be like physically there. Like if I really want to scale this thing, or I would need to get like a furniture store. And I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that at all.
Yeah, and I remember the picture that you shared during your presentation at Miami Seller Conference, showing like all the furniture you had there in your apartment, and it was
Yeah.
just like looked like you couldn't even really walk around. You just kind of had stuff everywhere. Which I mean, at one point, I have to have these pictures somewhere in my phone from like this would have been what early 2018 of like my one bedroom apartment in Chicago, which is where I was living at the time when I was doing online arbitrage. I mean, it was, you walk into my room and like you literally could not walk. You couldn't step anywhere. There's boxes and tape and bubble wrap and just products everywhere, just like littering the floor. And I had I guess technically it was a 2 bedroom because I had a roommate at the time, and he was like, we didn't even really talk that much. So he was probably just like, what the hell is this guy doing?
That's hilarious. Yeah,
Yeah.
like, oh man, it's so funny to go back. Like, I feel like when I started, social media was a thing, but no one was really like documenting like the
Hmm.
reselling journey. For like, aside from like Reezy, but like on Instagram and stuff like that. Man, like, I
Right.
kind of wish I had so many more pictures or kind of documented more. Like, I didn't really document most of my book selling journey. Like, it was when I got into bulk, I got the warehouse and all that kind of stuff. But like those early days, or even like me flipping furniture, I got to have like that scarcity mindset where it's like, oh man, if I share, like everyone's like
Right.
flipping furniture and like everyone's gonna do it now. But like I was like, you're so dumb. Like it's local to you. Like
Right.
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, but I just didn't think that way. Like now it's like, yeah, I'll share everything. I have a whole YouTube channel, podcast. Like this is how I source. Like I'm down to do that too.
Well, totally. And so it's funny, just today, actually, I was going through my camera roll. Like, apparently, I have photos dating back to like 2014 in my phone. But I was going through my camera roll to try to pull out some like warehouse pictures and storage unit pictures back when we were operating out of a storage unit to use as B roll in some of my YouTube videos. And I found, I think, like 65 or 70 photos. But I mean, 65 or 70 photos from what, 5.5 years of wholesale. That's not many photos. So I really wish that, like you said, I wish I had done a lot more documenting. I wish I had done more videos. I wish I had just taken more videos of myself, like just talking even into the camera, even if I didn't plan to post them anywhere, just like, hey, here's a recap of how this week went. Here's what we're working on. Here's what we're struggling with. That's the type of stuff that in hindsight would be really fun to watch just based on where we are now.
For sure. What made you actually start creating content? Because you haven't been creating
Uh,
content that long, right?
no, not that long. So I started January of last year. So I started January of 2023. And it was because I'd been selling on Amazon at that point for what, I guess 5.5 years. And I could count on literally on one hand the other Amazon sellers that I knew by name. It was like two or three guys. And one of them was Chris Potter, who people in
Oh
the
yeah.
e-com space might be familiar with because he's an e-commerce bookkeeper. A lot of people are his clients, myself included. But I somehow found the Buy Box Bandits podcast. I think I was just like looking for Amazon podcasts. And I was like, oh, like the hosts are these two young guys, like Miles and Garrett, like seem to be about my age. And so I'm scrolling through episodes. I'm like, oh, like they interviewed Chris Potter. That's cool. Like he was talking about bookkeeping and he talked some about wholesale. And I was scrolling through the episodes. I'm like, they have a lot of arbitrage content, but they don't have much about wholesale. I was like, I guarantee you, if I could get on that podcast, I could give them a lot of good wholesale information that maybe they haven't heard or maybe their listeners haven't heard. Right. So it's so funny. I reached out to Chris. I was like, hey, Chris, can you put me in touch with these guys? And he was like, yeah, I'll make an intro to Garrett. And he like introduced me to Garrett. Garrett totally blew me off. And I followed up with him like,
Oh, that's funny.
yeah, well, it's because I had literally zero followers, zero following, and zero tweets at the time. And so he was just
Okay.
like, who is
Makes
this, completely like, we don't even know if he's legit. But I followed up with him a couple of times. They agreed to have me on. I think my episode was pretty well received. And I remember after we stopped recording, Miles was like, dude, he's like, you got to start tweeting. He's like, get on Twitter today. I'm like, all right, sure. So I just started tweeting, started just talking about the wholesale business, sharing my experience, and it kind of just, took off from there. It was just super consistent with it, and that was it.
Yeah, that's awesome. You come up with like a lot of great content and like you're really well spoken on Twitter. And it is always funny too, as like someone on the other side. It like really sucks on Instagram because there are so many spammers.
Right.
Every
There
once
are
in a
so
while, there's
many.
that one person who's like really just trying to get started and like heard something like I need to get on social media. And like, what's the first piece of advice we give them? Like, reach out to people, like start networking, and like it's
Hmm.
really hard at first, like till you really get like content, like especially on Instagram, like you just get like all these random questions. I get like
Oh,
20
so many.
and it's just like some of it's like what like you just start to know like what's spam now and like what
Right.
isn't, and you just get like a better feel for it. um but yeah, that's kind of crazy how that happened. So how long were you doing OA then? So you went from books, so how long did you do books, how long did you do OA, and then when did you go to wholesale?
So I did books. So again, full timeline. So I graduate college May of 2017. I start getting into books literally 2 days after college graduation is when I started sourcing books. So I did books for the 2 months between graduation and moving to Chicago. And then even when I got to Chicago, there was a thrift store like kind of near my apartment. And I actually hit it up quite a bit. I found a lot of like clothing that I sold on eBay, found some books, found some like kind of what ended up being like rare collectible toys that I bought for, $2 and sold for like 100 on eBay. So this thrift store was kind of like a honey hole. And this kind of side note, not to go on a tangent, but I was still doing books at the time, and now I joined the University of Chicago Facebook group. Right, it's a student Facebook group, and there's a couple thousand people in this group. So I'm living in Chicago. I'm like, hey, like, and I made a post. I'm like, hey, I'll buy your textbooks. I'll pay cash. I'll come to you. Right, just I'll buy all your textbooks because I'm like textbooks seem to be where the money is with books, and so I bought books off a couple of people, went great, made good money on it. And then this one girl, I bought her textbooks off her. And, I came to her, I traveled like 25 minutes to come meet her, gave her cash, like more than she was going to get from the bookstore. And she asked me, she was like, hey, like, how old are you? Like, what are you doing with these books? And I was like, oh, like, I actually just graduated from college, but I sell these online. Like, I turn around and sell them on Amazon. That's kind of what I do, like, for side income. And she kind of like gave me this funny look and just literally just turned around and walked away. I'm like, that was weird. Whatever. Okay. Like I paid her. Sure. And then of course, I get home and I look at the Facebook group and she made this like very pissed off post about like, oh, this guy, he's taking
Oh,
advantage of students. And of course, all these college students who a lot of them are just super entitled to, oh, expose him, tell us who he is. And like she tagged me and then I just got roasted and I got kicked out of that group. So I was like, well, guess I'm done with the whole book thing. So again, this was a very long-winded way of saying I sold books for about probably 3 or 4 months, and then online arbitrage from probably September or October of 2017 through the end of 2018. And then I started wholesale like I remember January 6th, 2019 is when we established the LLC and started making cold calls to suppliers.
cool. Okay. Who do you have a partner?
Yeah, so originally my dad was my partner, so I needed capital to go into it. We went in on the business together, and so right now I'm in the process of buying him out, just because at this point I'm kind of running the day to day and want to be the sole owner.
That's awesome. I mean, that's like a really cool that like he was like, yeah, like I'll do this with you and like kind of help you out because sometimes you
Totally.
hear other parents are like, what is this Amazon thing? But my
Right.
parents like finally like understand it, like kind of what I
Yeah.
do, and you'll still get these weird questions like, hey, like does this box of cereal sell for profit? And you're like, no, it's like $5, like
It's
kind of
just
thing.
yeah,
But like
exactly.
every once in a while, they'll be like, hey, does this sell there? And it's like an exclusive at a store. You're like, yeah, like send more of that kind of stuff. Or like I
Right.
bought this for like my sister's kid who's like 4. And I was like, yeah, whatever you buy her, like send that to me. And like some of that stuff pans out, but it's always fun.
Yeah. Well, and it was cool because he's been an entrepreneur, he's been a business owner forever, and like the way so we kind of I guess researched the business together, and so we found a video from Watch Me Amazon, Larry Labarsky,
Yeah.
and this video at this point it's like 6 years old, but it was a very straightforward, simple video where he just is like it's a screen share of him showing a Google Doc, and he's just walking through the economics of wholesale. He's like, listen, let's say you start with 5K in capital, you spend it on profitable inventory, it comes back as 6K. right? Then you take that 6K, you spend it on profitable inventory, and it comes back as, let's say, 7,200. And then he kind of just like paints the picture of this is what the math looks like if you're buying good inventory. And you can kind of see the snowball effect over time. And we're like, wow, if we start with, let's say 20, 25, 30K for inventory, then we could see the snowballing to be a pretty big number over time, as long as we're playing our cards right and buying good products. And so to him, it was like, this is a pretty obvious, pretty obviously a business that's very scalable, right? And so that's I think what made him a lot more comfortable with it.
Cool. So I guess let's just in case no one knows. So what is the wholesale business model on Amazon, and kind of how does it differ from maybe OA and books?
Yeah, so wholesale is when we buy brand name products either directly from the manufacturer or from a distributor of some sort, right? And then we turn around and sell those products on Amazon. Now, there's a bunch of different, you could call them almost like business models within wholesale, but that's the general concept. And the way that it differs from like an arbitrage or even like a private label is with arbitrage, it's same concept. We're buying at a low price and we're turning around and selling on Amazon. But with arbitrage, you're buying from another retail store, right? Whereas with wholesale, we're buying from large manufacturers or distributors where we can get bigger quantities. Oftentimes we can get better pricing. We can get terms so we don't have to pay right away. There's a lot of benefits that come with buying at wholesale versus buying from a retailer. And then, when it comes to private label is the process of creating your own brand from scratch, having to market it, having to build it up from zero. Whereas with wholesale, we're just piggybacking on existing demand for these products that already sell well on Amazon.
Got it. Makes sense. So, Everett, you probably get this question all the time. So, how do you go about finding these suppliers?
So there's a bunch of different ways to go about it, and it really depends on your business model. So some people, they specialize in working directly with the manufacturer, oftentimes referred to as the brand. And that business model is going to require a certain level of expertise around how Amazon works, right? Because most of these brands, they don't want just another reseller. They want somebody that is going to help them actually grow their sales on Amazon. And in order to do that, you've got to know how to market products. You've got to know how to run ads. You've got to learn how to optimize listings, a lot of this specialized skill set. So if you're looking to find brands to work with and kind of take that approach with, my favorite tool by far for finding those brands is Smart Scout. Smart Scout has a tool. It's literally called the brands tool. You can use a bunch of different filters, a bunch of different criteria to kind of narrow down on the exact brands that you want to like hone in on and contact. And it makes that process easy as far as finding them. Now, what's usually an easier barrier to entry for most people is working with distributors, because distributors really only care about how much money you're going to spend and how often you're going to spend it. And the way that I've had the best luck finding distributors is literally just Googling, right? And a good search term or search phrase to use would be like category name. So for example, tools, and then the word distributor, and then your city or town, right? So for example, tool distributor, Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where I live. And that will actually give you a lot of really good results that you can go through and start reaching out to those suppliers.
Okay. So, what would kind of be the next step then? So, you find the suppliers, and then I guess would you just make like a Google Doc or like a list of these guys with some contact information?
Yep. So there's really a bunch of ways to go about it. But in general, you don't need a fancy CRM. You don't need any software tools. A simple Google Sheet's going to work. And my strategy is typically I like to find 10 to 20 suppliers, whether they be brands or distributors, put them in a Google Sheet with their contact information, and then I call them all. And then I find 10 or 20 more, and then I call them. And then I find more, and then I call them. So I kind of go through sprints of like, all right, today I'm finding suppliers, and maybe tomorrow I'm contacting them.
Got it. Okay. Is there a reason like you kind of do 20 at a time?
Not really. And I kind of use that number loosely. Like when I first started, I think I was doing maybe 20 to 30 per day. 20 to 30 new brands per day was my goal, like very in the very beginning when I first started, because my thought process was like, listen, I don't really know my pitch. I don't really know what I'm talking about. So the more conversations I can have quicker, the better I'm going to get. And so, but it does get to a point where if you're contacting, let's say 20 to 30 new suppliers every single day, well, you've still got to follow up with the ones that you've already contacted where you haven't closed the deal yet. So it adds up to be, lots of contacts every day once you factor in this follow up. So You can do 20 to 30 per day for the first couple of weeks, and then dial it back to really focus on those follow-ups and less so on reaching out to new suppliers.
So when you first started, because most people are going to start and probably not be good, what would you say like your hit rate was for like, I guess
Oh,
to
when
at
I
least get a catalog or whatever you need?
Yeah, so when I first started, probably 10%, 10 or 15%. I mean, partially because I just had no idea what I was doing. And I was coming across like every other call that these suppliers are getting every week, right? I was probably calling myself an Amazon seller. I was not being specific. I was just, I'd probably call them up and say, hey, my name's Corey. I want to open a wholesale account. And they're like, okay, well, what do you want? Like, what do you do? What are you looking for? Like, there's a lot of just like accompanying information that I could have given that would show them, okay, this guy's more serious than maybe the other 50 people that have called this week.
Makes sense. So what would your pitch look like today then? Or like what would be a good pitch for someone new to make them almost like not seem like a newbie and like they kind of know what they're doing?
Yeah, so I cold called two brands this morning, honestly, just for fun. Like I don't really care about landing the account. I did it for content that I'm going to be sharing within my community. But I called them up. Both of these were pretty large brands that were in a kind of a specific niche. And I mean, I knew I didn't really have a great shot of landing the account, but I was just like, hey, my name's Corey Ganim. I own a retail business. We're based up here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Wanted to call and see if I could get in touch with the sales rep that covers Charlotte. There's a couple of products that we're interested in buying, and I've got an order ready to go that I think they might like, right? Something along those lines where I'm telling them where I'm located, what I do, but I'm kind of vague about it, right? I say I'm just a
Yeah.
retail business, but I always allude to the fact that, hey, I know exactly, like I know the products I want to buy, I kind of have an order ready. I would just like to talk to someone in sales to kind of finalize it. That's
That's
kind of
actually like
the
really
pitch.
intriguing because you're like, oh, I want to buy some stuff. Instead of being like, hey, like, do you have, you're like, hey, I want to buy these three things. Like, who do I talk about to like buy these three things? Or it just shows like, it just seems like more like serious. Or like, oh yeah, we'll like transfer them to like sales and let them like sort this out.
Exactly, because John, I swear to you, for years, I like my pitch when I was talking to suppliers is they would say, because I wasn't specific at all. I'm like, hey, I'm looking to open a wholesale account. And they're like, okay, well, what do you want to buy? What are you looking to buy? And my response, which is just so terrible in hindsight, I was like, oh, well, we buy anything that's profitable. So once we get access to your pricing, we'll go through it and we'll kind of find what we can find. And to them, they're like, if I'm in their shoes and somebody's saying that to me, I'm like, okay, this guy's totally going to waste my time. Like he's not serious. He has no idea what he wants to buy. And for that reason, that's why my close rate was like 10%. But then when I shifted my approach, like I said, to be just way more specific, which takes 30 to 60 seconds of research before the call to say, all right, either if this is a brand, what are their best products? So I can mention those products. Or if this is a distributor, what brands do they carry so that I can just allude to a couple of brands, right? So
Mm.
nowadays, like exactly like you said, I might call them up and say, hey, I've got these three specific products and I'm ready to buy. I even know the quantities that I'm interested in. I'm actually just looking for a quote, right? Is there somebody in sales you could transfer me to? And so a lot of times they're just like, oh, well, yeah, he's ready to buy. Sure, that's Sam in sales that you can talk to.
And even if you don't, at least you get like a name or like something or a chance to at least talk to them. How do you identify kind of the when you're like, oh, I want these three things? Like, do they have like a list of like items on their website, or are you really just kind of using that to like to get them on the phone and then you kind of like figure it out as you go?
Yeah, so both. So in general, again, it differs slightly whether I'm talking to a brand or a distributor. So distributors are going to 95% of the time on their website, they're going to list all the brands they carry, right?
Okay.
And now most distributors, they're going to carry bigger brand names. And for example, if I'm calling up a grocery distributor and I look on their website and I see, they carry General Mills and Nestle and XYZ brands, I might call them up and say, hey, there are a couple of General Mills products that I'm interested in buying, right? Do I actually have a list of General Mills products that I'm ready to buy? Not really. But if they were to kind of push me on it, it wouldn't take me but 10 seconds to pull up Amazon, type in General Mills and say, oh, yeah, well, XYZ products, because I can at a glance already see what's selling well. So it is, you don't have to, they're not going to hold you to it necessarily, like what you say in that initial conversation, but just by having any sort of like goal or target or products that you're looking for, it automatically separates you from the guys that, like me back in the day, are calling them up and just saying, yeah, we kind of buy whatever's profitable.
That makes sense too, because I guess like you could also be like on the fly. You could also be like, oh, I just assumed like you would carry these, like a lot of other distributors we work with carry it, or just like take that
Exactly.
approach as well.
Yeah, and the thing you'll find too is that like when you take this approach, when you're serious, when you tell them what you want to buy, when they know your intentions, very rarely are they going to aggressively push back or be a jerk to you. Like the sales reps and the people, the brand owners, the people that I've talked to over the years that end up getting like snippy with me or that don't like me or that just are jerks are because I call myself an Amazon seller and I'm clearly going to waste their time, right? But think about it from their perspective. It's like if somebody's calling them up, they know what they want, they're just asking for a quote. Are you really going to be a jerk to like literally a customer that's calling you that's ready to buy? Like, not many people are going to be that clueless and that dumb to just like brashly turn away a customer like that, even if they are just selling on Amazon.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Is there something that like, comes to mind, like almost like something like someone like a rep said that was like really rude to you? You're like, oh shit.
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, so I've had every single word in the book used and said to me before. I mean, there was one guy. This was like in 2020 where I called him up. It was a brand owner, and he was like, what are you looking for? I'm like, oh, well, this specific product. I've got a couple of products of interest. We're kind of ready to move forward if we can get good pricing. And he was like, how much do you do in sales every year? I was like, and at the time we are about $1 million a year. I was like, oh, we're about 1.1 million over the last 12 months. And he's like, yeah, that's really small. Like that's nothing. You guys are nothing. And I'm like, okay, well, we've only been in business for a couple of years. We're growing, right? I'm trying to kind of like reaffirm the fact that I'm a customer. I'm ready to buy. And he's just like, no, that sucks. Like you guys, you're not serious. Like just get out of here. Just like hangs up. I'm like, okay.
Wow.
But I mean, even today, like I was saying earlier today, so there's two brands that I called today. One of the two brands, I call them up. I get somebody on the phone that you can tell she's just like a receptionist or someone in customer service. And right away, I say, hey, my name's Corey. Just kind of going through that pitch that I mentioned, trying to be specific. And she's like, oh, yeah, well, we don't really open wholesale accounts with guys like you. I'm like, guys like me? Like, what do you mean? I'm ready to buy. I'm a customer. And she was like, we get bugged by 50 calls like these a week. And so my response to her was like, listen, I understand. So how about this? How about you give me the names of your top two distributors and I'll call them up and I'll bug them so that I can leave you alone. And she kind of like laughed at it.
Okay.
She's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, like actually, and then she goes right into being like, oh, call this distributor and this distributor. And I'm like, okay, great. So she just gave me two perfectly qualified leads that even if that brand doesn't want to sell directly to me, I can just call these distributors and buy the brand from them. And that those distributors are going to carry tens or even hundreds of other brands, just like the one that I called. So it was kind of even more of a win than if she would have said, yeah, we'll work with you.
That's actually really funny too, because she probably like most people probably just leave it alone. And then like when
Yeah.
you kind of called her out, maybe in her head she's like, oh, that was kind of like a shitty thing to say.
Well, and
Let
I
me
even
give him a
post
little something. Like that was kind of an asshole move. Like I hope he doesn't like
right.
tell my boss or doesn't get back to the company. Because like that's not what we're
Right.
supposed to be doing here.
Well, exactly. And I even posted about it right after the fact. And my point was like I matched her energy, right? She was very quick and to the point. I could tell she wanted to get off the phones. So as soon as I picked up that energy, I'm like, listen, I get it. Don't let me waste your time. I'm gonna go bug somebody else, but tell me who to bug so I can stop bugging you. Was
Yeah.
kind of like the response there. And she was like, okay. Like, she kind of picked up at that point.
Yeah, and I think it also shows her too that that makes you just seem more serious because like most people would be like, all right, whatever, lady, like see you later or whatever. But like
Right.
you had like you were smart enough to come up with something that like almost grabbed her attention where she's like, oh, like no one really does this. Like, all right, maybe this person's a little more serious than I thought.
Well, in my experience, if you can get a laugh out of the person on the other line, especially if they come on super aggressive at the start, then, realistically, you can kind of go wherever from there, right? In my experience, the best conversations, the best accounts, the best, opportunities have come when I call somebody up, a supplier, and they're totally not interested. They're just like her, right? They're just kind of brash. They're to the point. They're trying to get me off the phone. And then as you get them to kind of open up, and once you get them laughing and kind of get them talking, 10 minutes later, they forgot all about it. And they're like, okay, well, so what do you do again? Like, what can I do to help you? Right. That they kind of change their tone at that point.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, just getting someone to laugh or just show like you're like personal and like all that kind of stuff. Do you have any like kind of lines that you like almost try to set them up to like get them to laugh, or like you say something knowing that you could come back with something that would probably make them laugh?
Yeah. So in general, just like self-deprecating humor or like Amazon seller deprecating humor works really well, right? Because a lot of the objections are of people like, let me put it this way. Sometimes when you're cold calling these suppliers, even if you were like work for a distributor or a big retail business or whatever, automatically they're just going to assume you're an Amazon seller because that's most of the calls that they get, right? So a line that I like to use a lot is like, listen, you hate Amazon sellers. I hate Amazon sellers too. If I were you, I would hang up on me, but give me 10 seconds and I'll tell you why you shouldn't, right? And then I'll just go into the fact that like we've been selling for 7 years. I don't want to waste your time. I know exactly what I want to buy. And if you don't want to sell to me, that's fine, but I'm going to just call your competitor, right? And then I might name drop, like, if it's a distributor, I'll name drop another distributor in their industry. Or if it's a brand, I'll name drop their biggest competitor, right? And that usually is at least enough to get them to stay on the phone for another couple of minutes.
Interesting. Yeah, because it almost seems like a lot of this, not that you're being deceiving or anything. It's just like you're coming like prepared. Like Hermosi had this whole thing on his podcast. I think it was like 2 episodes ago. Like if you are gonna do a call, like at least take 5 to 10 minutes just to look some stuff up. Like get like if you're gonna have an hour call, take I think it's like 10% or whatever it is. To kind of like figure some stuff out. And then yeah, eventually like once you start calling people, like you're gonna know the competitors or this or that. And then I think you hit them with like which everyone hates, is like that FOMO. Ooh, like he's a buyer. Like I could either try to get like commission off of him or like up my sales, or like he might be full of shit, but like I'd rather look into it a little more than just like cut him loose.
Well, and exactly, because it taps into like the competitive nature of a lot of these people. Because when you think about it, these brand owners and these sales reps and these people that own distribution businesses, like they're competitive and they want to make money. They want to do business. Like at the end of the day, when you frame things in terms of like what's going to put money in their pocket, then they're way more likely to do business with you. And that's why you always hear me talking about like quantify and be specific, right? So if they're starting to turn me down, I'm like, okay, understood. Well, I'm just going to take this order for 300 units of this product to competitor XYZ, right? Try to be as specific as possible. Because when I say the name of the product and the quantity, in that mind, if I'm talking to a salesperson, in their mind, they are already calculating that commission. They're like, okay, well, hold on. He's about to walk out the door with, a $12,000 order that I guess if I process that order, my commission would be $200. So, do I actually want to let him walk out the door? Like that's kind of the math that they're doing in their head, assuming you're talking to someone who's going to make a commission, which again is most sales reps at any manufacturer or distributor.
Interesting. Yeah, because then you're giving them like, oh wow, I could make XYZ on this,
Right.
instead of just being like, yeah, I don't really feel like going through the motions of giving this guy a quote and then he's gonna walk away or this or that.
Right.
So that's really interesting. Um, when do you think people should look into the wholesale model, and how much capital do you think they should have to kind of get it going?
Yep. So in general, I usually recommend people start with I wouldn't even call it lower risk because every Amazon business model is risky to some degree, but maybe like a lower intensity business model, something like an arbitrage or like a selling books, right? However, there are plenty of people that started their Amazon business, had never done anything else on Amazon, but started with wholesale and found success. So in general, I don't think there's any like great time to start versus any other time. But having some sort of Amazon foundation will be helpful. Now, when it comes to the amount of capital required, I always tell people 5 to 10K in cash for inventory is the ideal amount to start with. Again, always going to be exceptions to the rule. I know people that have started with as little as $1,000 and made it work and snowballed it over time. but generally 5 to 10K is going to put you in the best position to start.
So for most of these wholesalers and stuff like that, I mean, in the OA space, I mean, I always like to have like capital. I'm not over leveraging myself ever. Are you able to use credit cards and stuff like that, or is it mostly like ACH, cash, check when you're working with accounts?
So I try to put all of our spend on credit cards. In fact, I have a joke with my team. It's like I'm allergic to ACH. I'm allergic to paying to wires, because at the end of the day, the cash flow cycle and well, just on Amazon in general is so slow that if you pay cash for inventory today, you might not see that cash back in the form of, your sales and your profit for 60 days, sometimes even more, depending on how much you buy. So all of our inventory spend goes on credit cards. A lot of our suppliers only accept ACH or wire, meaning cash payments, but we'll use a tool called Melio where we can pay with a credit card, but the supplier gets cash. Now, Melio charges a 2.9% fee for us to be able to use that service, but we'll use either a Capital One Spark, which gives 2% cash back, or a Chase Inc. Business Premier, which gives 2.5% cash back over 5K to pretty much cancel out the bulk of that fee, right? So, worst case, we end up paying, I guess, 0.9% if we were to use a Capital One Spark and you paying Melio's fee in order to use credit card. And again, so that's what we do most of the time.
Yeah, it's a benefit too, because you can build the points, and then like I guess you could also like probably just bake it into your cost as well. Like this how much it costs us.
You could, but so when it comes to the cash back, I personally, now other people might have different strategies, but I take the cash back and pocket it just as my own personal, kind of like a bonus, because, and I think most credit card companies do this, but when they cut you the cash back check, they cut it to the name of the business owner, not the name of the actual business entity.
Yeah.
So I really couldn't even like take that cash and put it back into the business if I wanted to, unless I guess it would have to be coded as like a capital contribution on our books, which again doesn't make sense. I'd rather just kind of take it as a personal bonus.
That's a question for Chris Potter.
Yeah, I was about to say, I was like, that's a Chris Potter
we're
question.
not accountants. I was like, yeah. What are some like common objections that most people are going to hear when they get on the phone, trying to call someone, and how would you tell them to overcome them? Or like, I've done it before, like 2 or 3 years ago. Before I was doing, like, I heard, I would watch Dylan from Go Aura, and they were like all in the wholesale. And I was like, I'm going to do wholesale. I think I made like 5 phone calls, and I was like, I think I got yelled at like 3 times. And then I was like, I'm just going to stick with books. And then eventually grew a really big book business and kind of never thought about it. And then OA, when I first started, wasn't even really like a thing. It was like you went from books to wholesale. And if you really crushed wholesale, you went to private label. Like that was kind of the path.
Yeah. So you're talking about like most common objections that you get. So the first one that you're going to get by far the most often is, sorry, we don't allow Amazon sellers, or we don't work with Amazon sellers. And so my typical response is just to ask why. It's okay, I understand, but why is that the case, right? And I'd say 90% of the time it's because they've been burned by an Amazon seller in the past, or they've had bad experience with Amazon sellers. And usually it's because most Amazon sellers are unsophisticated, they're bad communicators, they place very small orders and never buy again. Like they're just a total waste of time. So by default, a lot of these suppliers will just deny any Amazon sellers. And so by asking why, right, and then letting them go into the reasoning why, I say, okay, well, what if we were to put an order in front of you today that might even be bigger than the order that you're used to for most of your dealers? Would that change your mind? Right. And then just kind of tailoring responses to overcome those objections. And again, always going back to being specific, pointing towards the order and showing them that, hey, I can put money in your pocket today. So who cares if I sell on Amazon?
Got it. That makes a lot of sense to kind of like look at it that way too. Yeah, that definitely. I feel like that was like too. It's like we don't sell to Amazon sellers, and I was like, yeah, I didn't really think about that objection. Like I have nothing to say. And I was like, okay, thanks. And then I was just like, and then I got close on one deal, and via email they agreed to like a certain price, and I was like, it was for like a scale or something, and then I was like, all right, cool. Like, this is the first one. I remember sitting at my 9 to 5. And I'm like, yes, like this first like thing is gonna close. And the lady's like, yeah, I thought you were paying like full price. Like, we can't do
Wait,
it.
so she quoted you on one price and then gave you a different price?
Yeah, like I don't know if she went to her boss and was just like, hey, this is the price that I gave him. And the boss was like, no. She's like, I just can't honor this price anymore. And then I was like, okay, like thanks, but I didn't have anything else. I just kind of passed.
Well, and so my response to if I come into a situation where pricing is just not quite where I need it to be, and maybe I have a very specific price in mind that I want to pay that might give me my margin that I'm looking for. Usually, I just ask, okay, well, how many units do I need to buy to get that price, right?
Ooh,
And
okay.
that's a great line to use because there's one of two things are going to happen. Either they're going to tell you how many units you need to buy, which might be more than you were planning to buy, might be less, but at least you know. And then the other thing that might happen is they're just going to tell you like, listen, like we literally can't offer that price because it's more than what we're or it's less than what we're paying, right? And
Got it.
so in either situation, you know, it's like, okay, well, if they can't honor that price, and either I've got to pay more or I've got to find another product. And if they do give me the number that they need to be at, then it's up to me at that point whether I need to buy that, whether I want to buy that many.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's also a good strategy too, because you're asking them a question they have to answer. It's not yes
Right.
or no. It's like, can you do any better on the price? And they're like, no. You're like,
Right.
well,
And then you're just
how
like,
do we make
well,
this
now I'm
happen?
screwed.
It's a different question.
Exactly. Like asking open-ended questions is definitely one of the best strategies. I mean, in sales in general, but especially in this business, right? And that reminds me, so a book that I read recently, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss,
It's a really good
which
book.
is yeah, fantastic book. I'd read it a couple of years back, but I reread it recently and I just couldn't believe how many gems are in that book. And like one of his key points is asking open-ended questions, right? And one of the best lines in the book is his question where he asks, well, how am I supposed to do that? Right. And then just
Yeah.
shutting up. So if the rep comes back to you and says, well, hey, we're at $13.50 per unit on this product, you could just say, well, listen, how am I supposed to do that? How am I supposed to do 13.50? And then let them respond, right? They might say, well, yeah, so actually we can do 13. And then ask again, well, how am I supposed to do that? And eventually it'll just get,
Amazing.
a lot of people will negotiate against themselves if you just keep asking these open-ended questions. That was a huge takeaway from that book.
I distinctly remember that part. I think he was like doing hostage negotiation. And the guy's
Yeah,
like, I want an airplane, I want a helicopter, I want this, I want that, I want everyone cleared out of here, and I want it done in an hour. And he's like, how am I supposed to do that? And it's just like
right.
in his head, he was like, yeah, I guess if they were to track down like a jet, like that would take some time to like
Yeah,
kind of get that shit situated.
it kind of like brings the other person back down to reality, right? And even if their offer or their price was like fair or realistic, it makes them question that, right? It's like, well, wait a second, is this actually a good price? Like maybe we should rediscuss, right?
Makes sense. What does your kind of day to day look like?
So my day to day at this point actually has very little to do with Amazon. And the reason for that, well, I say Amazon has very little to do with the operations of the business. And that's because Criselda, who's my head of operations, she runs literally 95% of the business. So I guess the extent of my involvement is just basically giving the thumbs up on purchase orders and then talking to key vendors and just kind of keeping them in the fold and just continuing to build that rapport. So my day to day, most of my day is spent creating content for folks inside the wholesale network and just for social media. And then a lot of networking, a lot of planning, right? Which sounds like people are like, oh, well, what do you get done by planning? It's like, trust me, you got to have some sort of plan in place and then be able to execute on that plan. So really my day to day is a lot of content creation and then minimal on the side of like actually managing the Amazon business, which by the way, I mean, ever since I'd say my Amazon workload has gone down significantly over the last year or so, but our profit and our revenue has gone up. So the more that I've like removed myself from that business, the better we've been doing. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna like continue to delegate everything I possibly can in regards to that business. And it's just gotten better over time because of that.
That's awesome. So how much staff do you have?
2 employees. So 2 in the Philippines. We've got, so Criselda, who's the head of operations, she's in the Philippines. She's at about 50 to 55 hours per week. And then Ralph, who's also in the Philippines, he's our admin, and he's at about 20 hours per week. So they work very closely as a team. Ralph is doing any of kind of like the low level admin tasks, and Criselda is doing everything from sourcing to placing orders to creating shipping labels to getting products to Amazon, following up with suppliers. Like, she honestly does so much. She does everything that I used to do. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Do you have a warehouse, or are you prep center, or how does that work?
Yep. So we had a warehouse back in, I guess we actually bought one. It was a small one, like 2,000 square feet. I'd say mid to late 2020. And then we sold it in mid 2021, outsourced completely to a prep center. But now, again, fast forward to today, 2024, we do still use prep centers, but I'd say 90% of what we're buying is going straight from our suppliers to Amazon. Either our suppliers are prepping for us because they offer prep services, or we're paying Amazon to simply label products, which they will do for a cost.
Interesting. So you don't even have a prep center.
No, we do, but we just use them sparingly. So really the only time we would use a prep center is for specific products where maybe we need them bundled or multi-packs created, and maybe our supplier is not willing to do that. So then we'll ship to our prep center, and then we'll have them handle that sort of prep.
Wow, that's amazing, because I feel like most like wholesalers I've come in contact with, they either have, most of them have their own warehouse. I kind of deal with that. You don't really see too many do prep center route, because I guess the margins are a little tighter. That's what they say anyway. So that's really interesting.
Well, and it depends on the types of products you're selling too, right? So for example, one of my buddies, his name's Philip. He lives up in New York. He's got I think a 10,000 square foot warehouse in Brooklyn, 5 or 6 employees there. And he pretty much has to have a warehouse because they're selling low ticket grocery products for the most part, right? 12, 15, $20 price points, where if you were paying a prep center $1 a unit to prep those for you, that's going to very much hurt your margins, right? Whereas, I mean, at some points, our average sale price is $50, $60, $70, sometimes higher. I guess we kind of have the buffer to pay a prep center or pay our supplier a small fee to prep on our behalf.
Got it. For suppliers, do they charge like prep centers, or is it usually cheaper?
So it's usually cheaper. Most of our suppliers charge, I guess our lowest cost supplier in terms of like prep costs, they'll charge 25 cents a unit for just an FN SKU. And then Amazon will charge, I think, 55 cents per unit to FN SKU. And then a prep center will charge 70, 80 cents, even up to $1 just to FN SKU or for standard prep. And then a lot of times too, with our suppliers, we're able to negotiate prep to be included in the cost, right? So sometimes they might say, hey, we've got this product for $15 and we'll prep it for 25 cents a unit. Well, a good negotiating tactic that we've used is we'll say, okay, well, hey, if we were to buy all of them, will you guys include prep in that $15 cost? And a lot of times they will.
Right, because they're like, we're just gonna make up for it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not that much more work, really.
Right.
Interesting. Probably the sales guy's like, I don't care. I'll have to put the label on it. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like a lot of times they are just right, and they're just willing. Again, the more you buy, the more you're willing to make their life easier by just being, having them process one big order for you instead of maybe 3 smaller orders for 3 different sellers. It's way easier for them to just throw in the prep and deal with one customer than to even pay or get paid to prep on behalf of, let's say, 3 different customers.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What's the most you've spent on a single ASIN?
On a single ASIN, probably this past Q4, like 75K, or actually, I guess we spent 75K on a single ASIN a couple of times. So once was 3 years ago, we bought like 75K of this Marine 2-way radio. And then every Q4, we usually buy Well, it's like 100 to 110K of two different SKUs, and usually like 75 to 80K of that spend is one SKU.
Wow. Okay. How do you kind of go about that? Like almost like test buying purposes, right? Did you buy it like, I don't know, 10K at a time, and then you're like, all right, it's time to like full send this? Or I know test buying can be tricky when you're doing wholesale.
Yep. So there's a lot of different factors that go into it. So one is going to be just like general supply in the market. So that one product that I mentioned where we buy, let's say 75K worth of the one product every Q4. Well, the reason we go so deep is because we're buying it directly from the manufacturer. They limit the number of Amazon sellers that can sell the product. And we've sold the product for almost 4 years now, right? And every single year, like clockwork, this thing spikes in demand during Q4 because it's kind of seasonal. We hold our price high. Everybody else sells out at a lower price, and then we're able to sell through all of our inventory at like a really high margin. And that's been the case for 3 or 4 years. So we're willing to go deep because we know how much is being produced. Because I just asked the brand, I'm like, hey, how many units are you guys making this year? And they might say, oh, well, we're producing 10,000 units in Q4. I say, great, we'll take 7,000 of them and just wait for everybody else to sell through. Another factor is just, well, it kind of plays into that, right? It's just like communicating with the brand and knowing kind of like what their plan is, right? Because if, to use that same scenario, if they were to say, well, yeah, actually this year we're making 50,000 units and you guys usually buy, 7,000, how many do you want? I might say, well, actually we might only want like 2,000 this year because if the market's going to get flooded, then we're going to make a way lower margin and we're not going to go as deep.
That makes sense. Have you ever had any like really big losses on ASINs?
Yeah, so that, I guess we haven't necessarily lost like, I don't think we've lost more than 8 to 10K on like a single ASIN, but
Okay.
that's happened twice. One of them was these chocolates that we bought, I think 2 years ago. We pre-ordered them in the summer for Christmas. They didn't get to Amazon in time for
Uh,
Christmas. So we were sitting on like a lot of this Christmas chocolate, and it's January and we're just not selling any of it. So we ended up having to dispose of a lot of that. Lost, yeah, probably like 10K there. And then those marine two-way radios that I mentioned, this was back in I think 2020. So it was like a perfect storm for what I thought was going to be a really profitable buy. We've been buying this product for a year and a half. The manufacturer had a big backlog in producing these. So it's like as soon as we got our hands on them, we sold them right away because there just wasn't much supply in the marketplace. So we bought 75K worth of this Marine two-way radio. It had a MAP price of $199.99. MAP meaning essentially the lowest we were allowed to price is $199.99. So we knew our profit was kind of locked in because nobody was allowed to break that price point. So we went deep. We put them on Amazon. We sent them into FBA, and then 2 days after they got to FBA, the brand decides to lift their MAP policy. So they remove the MAP policy entirely, which now the price goes into a free fall because now everybody's competing with each other to lower the price. So we ended up selling, the price goes from, basically $200 to $195 to $190 to $185. Like we just watched it just tank,
dropping it
and
with
we ended up,
$5 increments. That's never a good
it
time.
was, yeah, it was brutal. And so I think we lost probably like 8K total on that buy over the course of, it took us probably 2 months to sell through all of it. But yeah, again, that was on paper, it was a good buy, but there was nothing like we weren't able to foresee kind of what caused us to lose money there. So it was a learning lesson though.
Yeah, I guess that's like kind of good too, because like when you look back, you're like, yeah, I probably would have done this again. It just didn't like work out. And I feel like a lot of people
Right.
sometimes don't get that on Amazon. Like when you lose money on an ASIN, sometimes it's just the way, like, it's just how it goes. Like,
Right.
unforeseen circumstances happen, or Amazon regates everyone, or just like weird stuff happens. And like, it
Yep.
doesn't mean you're not good. It just means that like it didn't go your way this time.
Yep. Exactly.
Um, what do you think is the hardest part about growing a wholesale business? Or what are some challenges people are gonna kind of come up with?
So the way I like to look at it is there's really like two phases to wholesale, right? So phase one is you've got too much capital and not enough products to buy. And then phase two is you've got too many products to buy and not enough capital. So at any point in your business, you're going to be at one of those two phases where product leads are going to be the bottleneck or capital is going to be the bottleneck. And so we're definitely in the position where capital is the bottleneck. I mean, if you gave me $1 million in cash, I could have it spent in the next 10 days, probably pretty easily. But it's also, Amazon being the way that it is, they can shut you down, they can gate listings, they can do this, they can do that. So I really am not of the mind where I'm like, I don't want to scale at all costs. I don't really want to borrow money. I kind of want to grow organically and just kind of let it go from there.
That makes sense. How do you handle returns?
So our return handling process is terrible. Like, people are going to cringe at this, but generally we just dispose of our return. Like, so actually, let me put it this way. So when a return comes back, it goes to Amazon, they inspect it. If it's still brand new, it goes right back into our inventory for sale. If it's damaged or used in any way, we have it set up to automatically go through Amazon's liquidation program, where we might get 5 cents on the dollar, right? Basically nothing. And then anything that Amazon can't liquidate for us, we have it set to just dispose of. And the reason for that is because I don't want a ton of returns sitting here in my apartment. I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to see them. So I'm willing to just take the loss. I really don't care. But we're in the process of getting set up with like a returns processing company, to where now, instead of just disposing of those units, our returns are going to get sent to them. They're going to monetize them on eBay or Marketplace or wherever they monetize these, and then we get a portion of that monetization. So that's going to get us some money back from these returns.
Got it. Yeah, returns are such a hard part of Amazon because, like, I feel like when it comes down to your time. Like, are you
Yep.
really gonna list something on eBay to get $5 back?
Yeah, hell
Like,
no.
you're gonna
Like,
lose
absolutely
$5.
not.
Like, you're losing money, but you're also losing
Right.
again because you're taking pictures, you're doing this, or like even Facebook Marketplace. Like, I've definitely experimented with it, and it's like, oh, they don't come, they don't do this, they don't do that, and like you may be getting your money back, but at the end of the
Right.
day, it's just really
It's costing
hard.
you so much time.
Yeah, it's insane. And I haven't really come up with a good solution either. Like, most of the stuff comes here, and hopefully most of it I can send back to Amazon. But I'm all prepped
Mm-hmm.
now. So that creates another problem because like I'm not sending out shipments. So like it's
Right.
not like I could just like sneak them in there. I've tried a return service before. It didn't really go great. So I haven't found like a really good one yet. But yeah, returns are just a really problem for sure.
Huge problem. Yep. So, I mean, if there's again, the one that we're considering working with, we haven't signed on with them yet, but if they go well, then hopefully that's something I can recommend to people, because that's a service that's desperately needed in the community.
For sure. And I feel like it's hard too we've talked about on another podcast where for the actual person processing the returns, a lot of the times it's hard for them because if they're making
Right.
email things and like they're really not getting a high like margin or a high dollar cost, or things are just broken in general, like their percentage is gonna be super low. And it's
Right.
very labor intensive. What we'll get wrap this up. What is one piece of advice you wish you had known when you started wholesale on Amazon?
So I wish I would have known just how long it was going to take to scale or to find success, or whatever you want to call it, right? So like I remember when I first started wholesale, our first wholesale account that we bought from, I was like, oh, this is it. Like, we're going to do 1 million in sales this year. Like, we're going to crush it. And that just wasn't the case, right? It actually took us almost over 3 years to have our first 7-figure sales year. So just in general, I wish I knew how long it was going to take so that I was able to kind of set my own expectations properly.
Yeah, I'll always remember. I actually, when I first started to do OA, actually paid like a coach a lot of money to like do a consultation call, and I thought like I was gonna do like $1 million my first year OA, and I was just like, all right, like this is the goal, and they're like, why is that the goal? They're like, there's no
Right.
way you're like, you could do that, but like you're gonna lose a ton of money. You're not gonna learn a lot. They're like, you'd be better off doing. I think the first year I did like 800K or something like that. And she's like,
That's
and
a
then you
really good
just
first year, though.
scale. Yeah, you just scale it slow and kind of learn. But I was like, oh, I'm gonna do seven. Like it's gonna be so easy. Like I see everyone doing this on Instagram. Like I already run a book business, like just switching what I'm buying. And like that was not the case at all, but that's really
Right.
funny. Where can everyone find you?
So best place to find me would be on my podcast, actually. So it's the Amazon Wholesale Podcast. It's over on YouTube, it's on Spotify, it's on Apple, it's wherever you listen to podcasts. So that's going to be the best place.
Cool deal. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you guys on the next episode.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Peace.